You know, when the Galactic Council first proposed giving humans protective armor, I thought it was standard procedure. Then Captain Vasquez stood up and said something that made every diplomat's tentacles twitch. We don't need armor. We are the armor. Let me tell you how a species from a death world became the galaxy's emergency response system. You know how most spacefaring species handle new threats. They build better shields, develop stronger alloys, create more sophisticated energy barriers. It's the standard evolutionary response pattern across the galaxy. When danger appears, you put more stuff between you and the problem. So the council meeting that day started like every other safety review session. Representatives from a dozen species were arguing over protection standards, each pushing their own version of optimal safety gear. The Corvinathi wanted thicker armor plating, the Vaxi insisted on multi-phase energy dampeners, and the Real were pushing their new adaptive nanofibers. Standard political posturing, really. Everyone trying to sell their own technology as the universal solution. Then they opened humanity's file. The shift in the chamber was immediate. Where every other species had pages of clearly defined vulnerability profiles, specific radiation tolerances, atmospheric pressure limits, thermal regulation requirements, humanity's assessment looked like someone had forgotten to finish the report. No obvious physical advantages, no specialized biological protections, just a collection of average measurements that suggested a remarkably unremarkable species. Council members immediately assumed the obvious humans were technologically primitive newcomers who hadn't developed proper spacefaring protection systems yet. They started drafting proposals for specialized human-rated armor before anyone even thought to consult actual human representatives. I remember watching the debate, thinking how perfectly it captured the galactic community's paternalistic instincts. Here was another species that needed to be protected, coddled, treated like children who didn't understand the dangers of space. The assumption was so universal nobody questioned it. Humans were fragile, needed babysitting, required the galaxy's protection. They started designing custom environmental suits, specialized ship modifications, entire safety protocols based on this fundamental misunderstanding of what humans actually were. What nobody considered, what never occurred to any of us was that maybe humanity's file looked different because humanity itself was different, not because they lacked protection, but because their protection worked on principles we hadn't even thought to measure. This complete misinterpretation of human capabilities set the stage for what happened next. The Council had built this entire framework of assumptions about human fragility, creating exactly the wrong solution to a problem they didn't understand. They were about to offer band-aids to a species that had evolved to regenerate limbs. Which brings us to that moment when Captain Vasquez walked into the council chamber, looked at their elaborate protection proposals, and completely dismantled centuries of galactic safety doctrine with a single sentence. Look, every species that makes it to space thinks their homeworld gave them the perfect preparation. They'll tell you about their harsh winters or acid rains or predatory megafauna like it's the ultimate survival course. And sure, those environments create tough species, but Earth was playing a completely different game. Most planets develop relatively stable ecosystems over geological time. Predictable seasons, consistent atmospheric composition, gradually evolving threats. Earth never got that memo. The place operated on chaotic instability as its default setting. You had ice ages that wiped out nearly all life, followed by tropical periods that turned the planet into a hyper-competitive deathmatch where everything was trying to eat everything else. The air itself kept changing composition dramatically. Oxygen levels swinging from suffocatingly low to dangerously high multiple times over millions of years. Predators evolved alongside humans in this endless biological arms race, developing new hunting strategies that forced us to develop new defenses, which then prompted new offensive adaptations. It was this perpetual escalation where standing still meant extinction. Diseases mutated constantly, bypassing immune defenses almost as fast as we could develop them. Viruses jumped species, bacteria developed resistance, parasites found new ways to hijack biological systems. The medical challenges alone would have wiped out most species within generations. Then you had the planet itself actively trying to kill everything on it. Earthquakes that could swallow cities whole, volcanic eruptions that darkened skies for years, weather systems that could generate winds strong enough to strip flesh from bone. And all of this happening simultaneously, layered on top of each other in this multi-threat environment, where solving one problem just meant you had attention free to notice the next three heading your way. This constant, multifaceted threat environment created a species that doesn't just tolerate danger, we expect it. For humans, operating in hazardous conditions isn't an emergency situation. It's Tuesday. Their baseline assumption is that things will go wrong, systems will fail, and environments will try to kill them. So they build that expectation into everything they do. When Captain Vasquez called Earth a death world during that council meeting, the other delegates thought she was being dramatic. They assumed it was typical species pride, exaggerating homeworld challenges to seem tougher, but she wasn't exaggerating. If anything, she was understating the case. Most species come from worlds that shape them to survive specific challenges. Humans came from a world that shaped them to survive anything, because on Earth, anything could and would happen. Let me tell you about the incident that first made the galactic community realize humans operated on a completely different set of rules. It wasn't some dramatic battle or heroic rescue. It was a routine maintenance operation at Hegemony Station that went spectacularly wrong in ways nobody could have predicted. The station was running standard systems checks on experimental containment units when the primary containment field for exotic matter destabilized without warning. One moment everything was normal operations. The next, the entire station was flashing emergency codes across every screen. Radiation levels spiked so high that standard monitoring equipment just maxed out and died. Readings went straight to levels that medical techs classified as instantly lethal to every known carbon-based species. Structural integrity. Alarms started blaring simultaneously across multiple sectors as exotic particles interacted with conventional matter in unpredictable ways. Bulkheads warped, support beams fractured, and entire sections began experiencing localized gravitational anomalies that made navigation nearly impossible. Life support systems failed cascade-style as power grids overloaded from the energy feedback. Emergency protocols triggering and then immediately failing, because the situation exceeded all design parameters. Within 17 minutes, every non-human crew member had either evacuated in whatever functional escape pods remained, or succumbed to the rapidly deteriorating conditions. Standard procedure was clear. Containment failure at this scale meant total abandonment and letting the station breach itself into the safety of empty space. Except one human engineer decided procedure could use some revision. Senior engineer David Park remained at his post, working his way through damaged corridors that were simultaneously radioactive, structurally unsound, and periodically experiencing random gravity shifts. He bypassed fried control systems manually, rerouted power through auxiliary conduits, and apparently treated the whole situation like a moderately challenging repair job rather than what it actually was. A catastrophic failure that should have killed anything that stayed longer than 5 minutes. He worked for 4 straight hours in conditions that would have dissolved most species' cellular structures. Radiation that should have caused immediate systemic failure, atmospheric contaminants that should have induced coma, gravitational fluctuations that should have turned internal organs to pulp. Park just kept troubleshooting, occasionally stopping to sip from his water pouch while he recalculated containment field harmonics. When the Corvinati emergency response team finally breached the station, after waiting what they considered a safe period for radiation levels to drop to merely dangerous rather than instantly fatal, they found Park sitting at a partially melted console, drinking what remained of his water. Containment was restored, systems were stabilized, and he'd apparently taken a break at some point to make himself a sandwich from supplies in a relatively intact galley unit. His medical readout showed mild dehydration and slightly elevated blood pressure, the kind of numbers you'd expect from someone who'd spent a long afternoon moving furniture, not saving a station from total annihilation while swimming through a radioactive nightmare. The incident report noted his sandwich was roast beef and mustard on rye, which somehow made the whole thing even more disturbing to everyone who read it. You know what really got the Corvinati medical team scratching their head ridges? They went into that station expecting to find some kind of hidden technology. Maybe personal shields they hadn't detected, or specialized armor woven into the environmental suit, or some human technological trick that explained how someone survived conditions that should have vaporized organic tissue. Standard procedure when you encounter the impossible, look for the technological cheat code. What they found instead was biological systems operating on principles they'd never documented in any species. Park's immune response was adapting to novel radiation types in real time, creating customized antibodies for particles that didn't exist in nature. His circulatory system had rerouted blood flow away from peripheral tissues to protect major organs, something their medical texts said required conscious control and specialized equipment. Yet his body did it automatically, like it was just standard operating procedure when things got interesting. His metabolic processes had shifted to utilize energy from radiation exposure directly, essentially treating lethal particles as an alternative fuel source rather than a threat. Cognitive functions maintained perfect clarity despite sensory input that should have induced seizure or catatonia in any other species. The medical scanners kept showing data that contradicted established biological limits, like watching someone violate physics by casually walking through walls. The resulting medical report read like bad science fiction, systems adapting to threats they'd never encountered, organs functioning outside design parameters, cellular repair mechanisms working at speeds that defied biological possibility. No hidden technology, no secret armor, just raw biological adaptability cranked to levels nobody thought possible. This was the moment the galaxy started understanding what made humans different. They weren't surviving despite the danger. They were operating within it like it was their natural environment. Their bodies treated catastrophic failure as just another Tuesday afternoon, deploying biological responses that other species needed entire medical facilities to replicate. The medical team realized humans aren't organisms that need protection from hazardous environments. They're walking biological hazmat suits designed by millions of years of everything on their planet trying to kill them. Their evolutionary path created a species that doesn't avoid danger, so much as incorporates it into their operational parameters. Where other species developed technology to create safe environments, humans developed biology to function within unsafe ones. It explained why Park could work for hours in conditions that should have killed him instantly. His body wasn't fighting the radiation or the structural chaos, it was adapting to use them, treating the entire catastrophe as just another variable to work with, rather than an obstacle to overcome. The containment breach wasn't an emergency to survive. It was a complex system that needed troubleshooting. This biological flexibility became the foundation for everything that followed. The galaxy had been looking at human safety requirements completely backward. They weren't designing protection for a fragile species. They were learning from a species that was protection incarnate. The armor wasn't something you put on humans. It was something they already were, honed by an evolutionary history where the only constant was everything trying to kill you. So when Captain Vasquez walked into that council chamber, she carried the weight of everything we'd just learned from Hegemony Station. The medical reports, the engineering logs, the biological data that contradicted centuries of established science. She had the evidence that humans operated on completely different survival principles. But the council expected a very different conversation. They'd prepared this elaborate presentation about human vulnerability assessments, had charts showing our radiation tolerance limits compared to other species, diagrams of proposed protective gear, even mock-ups of specialized human-rated escape pods. They expected gratitude, maybe some negotiation about safety standards, the typical diplomatic dance where a younger species accepts protection from its elders. Instead, Vasquez looked at their elaborate safety proposals like someone examining an excessively complicated solution to a simple problem. She acknowledged their concerns with this dry courtesy that somehow felt more insulting than outright rejection, thanked them for their thoroughness while simultaneously making their entire effort seem slightly ridiculous. Then she delivered the line that changed everything. "We don't need your armor," she said, that flat tone making it sound like the most obvious statement in the galaxy. "We are the armor." You could actually see tentacles twitching around the chamber. Council members looked at each other like they'd misheard the translation. Here was a species they'd classified as needing maximum protection, declaring themselves the protection. She explained it without drama, like she was describing basic engineering principles. Human evolution didn't create perfect defenses against specific threats. It created systems that could function despite damage. Multi-layered redundancy where if one system failed, 3 others could take over. biological adaptability that treated novel threats as interesting puzzles rather than existential crises. Their strength wasn't in resisting damage but in operating through it. Where other species developed technology to avoid danger, humans developed biology to operate within it. They didn't see hazardous environments as problems to be solved so much as conditions to be worked in. The council kept looking at their vulnerability charts while Vasquez talked about functional parameters. They were thinking in terms of protection levels while she described operational tolerances, entirely different frameworks for understanding survival. I remember watching the real ambassador's facial feathers flatten in confusion. The Vaxi representative's carapace actually changed color slightly, which I'd never seen happen outside of mating displays. They were experiencing what humans call cognitive dissonance on a species level. This single statement recontextualized humanity from protected to protection. They weren't a fragile species that needed guarding. They were a resilient system that could guard others. The galaxy had been looking at the wrong column in the spreadsheet, measuring the wrong variables, asking the wrong questions. Vasquez didn't propose human-led safety teams or special operations. She simply stated a biological fact that forced everyone to reconsider their entire approach to risk management. The conversation shifted from, how do we protect humans, to, how do we utilize human protective capabilities. It was one of those moments where you realize an entire field of study has been operating on flawed assumptions, like discovering gravity works differently than you thought, or that the universe has more dimensions than your instruments could detect. The council wasn't just hearing new information, they were learning their framework for understanding safety was incomplete. Humanity went from being the subject of protection protocols to becoming the standard by which protection would be measured, not because they were superior, but because they represented an entirely different approach to surviving in a dangerous universe. Where others built walls, humans learned to dance in the storm. Look, every spacefaring species develops these elaborate protocols for emergency scenarios. They create detailed response matrices, contingency plans for every conceivable failure mode, safety systems built around predictable patterns of disaster. Their entire approach assumes that emergencies follow recognizable patterns and have established solutions. It's like building a library of answers for questions you expect to be asked. But humans approach problems with what I've come to call the improvisation gene. It's not some actual genetic marker, more like a deeply ingrained mindset that treats unexpected situations not as catastrophes, but as interesting puzzles waiting to be solved. Where other species see system failure as a reason to implement predetermined emergency protocols, humans see it as an opportunity to get creative with available resources. Their brains seem wired to generate multiple potential solutions simultaneously rather than following linear decision trees. You'll watch a human engineer faced with a critical systems failure, and they're already testing 3 different approaches, while others are still consulting protocol manuals. They'll try rerouting power through non-standard conduits, repurposing environmental systems for emergency cooling, using communication arrays as makeshift energy, diffusers solutions that would never appear in any official emergency manual because they violate half the safety standards in the process. Failure doesn't register as endpoint data for humans. A solution that doesn't work isn't a dead end. It's valuable information about what not to try next time, or sometimes it reveals secondary options they hadn't considered. They treat failed attempts like puzzle pieces that almost fit, rather than mistakes that need to be avoided. This mindset comes straight from their evolutionary environment. On Earth, the rules changed constantly without warning. A food source that was safe yesterday might develop toxins today because of some environmental shift. A shelter that stood for generations might collapse in the next earthquake. A predator that hunted by sight might suddenly evolve better hearing. What worked perfectly one season could get you killed the next. So humans evolved this flexible approach to problem solving, where adaptability mattered more than perfection. They learned to treat chaos as the default state rather than an aberration. Their cognitive processes developed to function effectively in uncertain, rapidly changing conditions where waiting for perfect information meant certain death. This is why humans keep functioning when other species freeze in emergencies. They don't see chaos as something to be controlled before action can be taken. They see it as the normal background condition for decision-making. Their threshold for acceptable uncertainty is orders of magnitude higher than any other species we've encountered. where others need clear parameters and established procedures. Humans operate comfortably in gray areas where the rules haven't been written yet. They'll make decisions with limited information, adjust approaches mid-execution, and treat unexpected complications as interesting variations rather than mission-ending events. This improvisational capability became the foundation of their value to the galactic community. While other species were developing better emergency manuals, humans were developing better emergency mindsets. They weren't following protocols. They were writing new ones in real time, adapting to situations that existing protocols never anticipated. The galaxy had been trying to solve safety through better planning. Humans demonstrated that sometimes safety comes from better improvising. You know what really separates human engineering from everyone else's approach? It's not better materials or more advanced technology. It's this fundamental difference in how they think about failure itself. Most species design systems with single-point failure protection. They identify the most likely things that could go wrong and build safeguards against those specific scenarios. It's like building a castle with one really strong gate but only one way in or out. Humans build systems that can fail in half a dozen different ways and still keep functioning. They incorporate multiple backup systems that operate completely independently, often using different principles or energy sources so that a failure in one area doesn't cascade into others. Their power grids might have solar, nuclear, and kinetic backup systems that don't just activate when primary systems fail. They're running simultaneously at reduced capacity, ready to ramp up instantly. This approach mirrors their biological systems perfectly. Humans have redundant neural pathways for critical functions, backup organs that can compensate for failing primary systems, cellular repair mechanisms that work through multiple chemical processes. If one method gets compromised, two others can take over. Their bodies treat single-point failure as such a fundamental design flaw that evolution built layer upon layer of alternatives into their basic biology. Their technology reflects this evolutionary principle of layered redundancy. While other species optimize for efficiency, streamlining systems to eliminate unnecessary components, humans optimize for functionality during failure. They'll add extra components, alternative pathways, manual override systems that seem inefficient until everything else stops working. Then those inefficient backups become the only thing keeping the system operational. This mindset comes straight from their evolutionary environment. On Earth, any system could fail without warning. Food sources could disappear due to climate shifts or competition. Shelter could collapse in earthquakes or storms. Protection from predators could fail as new hunting strategies evolved. Nothing was guaranteed, so redundancy became the key survival strategy. Having multiple options became more important than having one perfect option. Their engineering philosophy reflects this biological imperative. Human-designed ships might have 3 separate navigation systems using different principles: stellar mapping, quantum positioning, and old-fashioned inertial guidance, because they assume at least one might fail unexpectedly. Their life support systems incorporate biological, mechanical, and chemical backups that can operate independently for extended periods. This is why human-designed systems keep working when others fail catastrophically. Where a standard galactic freighter might lose all power if the main reactor goes offline, a human-built ship might have 6 smaller reactors that can collectively maintain essential functions, even if several fail. Their systems are designed to degrade gracefully rather than collapse completely. The galaxy had been approaching safety from the wrong direction. Everyone was trying to prevent failures, while humans were designing systems that could function through failures. They weren't building stronger walls. They were building multiple walls with the assumption that some would eventually collapse but others would hold. It's a fundamentally different relationship with risk, one that treats failure not as something to be avoided but as something to be managed and accommodated. This redundancy principle explains why human teams can operate in conditions that would disable other species' technology. Their systems are built with the expectation that things will go wrong, that environments will be hostile, that multiple systems might fail simultaneously. Where others see catastrophic failure, humans see Tuesday afternoon. Let me be clear about something other species consistently misunderstand when observing human behavior in crisis situations. They watch humans continue working while radiation alarms blare, or pressing forward through structural collapses that would send any sensible species retreating. and they label it as irrational stubbornness or reckless bravery. The assessment seems obvious on the surface. Here's a species that ignores danger signals and continues operations when any rational being would cut their losses and evacuate. But what appears to be stubbornness is actually something far more sophisticated. Humans have developed an extraordinary tolerance for existential uncertainty that borders on the pathological to outside observers. They can acknowledge the very real possibility that they might not survive a situation, while simultaneously continuing to function effectively within that same situation. This isn't some brave disregard for personal safety, it's a practical acceptance of dangerous reality, combined with a calculated assessment that continuing to act still offers better odds than surrender. Their evolutionary history taught them that giving up guarantees death. On Earth, stopping meant freezing, starving, being caught by predators, or succumbing to exposure. Continuing to move, to think, to try things, even with low probability of success, at least offered some chance, however small, of unexpected survival. This created a species that treats surrender as the only true failure, while even failed attempts provide valuable data for the next effort. This calculated stubbornness is baked into their decision-making processes at fundamental levels. When a human team continues working on a failing station instead of evacuating, they're not being reckless. They're running complex risk calculations that factor in the low probability of evacuation success versus the slightly higher probability of system recovery. They're weighing the value of the station against the statistical likelihood of various outcomes, and choosing the option that offers the best odds, however slim. What looks like recklessness to other species is actually highly refined risk calculus operating on different parameters. Where others see a 10% chance of survival as justification for retreat, humans see it as a workable probability worth pursuing. Their threshold for acceptable risk is calibrated by an evolutionary history where 10% survival odds were often the best available option. This explains why human teams will remain in situations that protocol says should be abandoned. They're not ignoring danger. They're recalculating the risk parameters based on real-time assessment of changing conditions. Their persistence isn't blind stubbornness, but continuous evaluation of whether continuing effort still offers better outcomes than withdrawal. The galaxy had been measuring human behavior against standards developed by species that evolved in more predictable environments. They were applying risk assessment models based on stable conditions to a species shaped by perpetual instability. This fundamental mismatch in how different species calculate acceptable risk created the perception that humans were reckless, when they were actually just using different math where other species see binary choices, safe or unsafe, possible or impossible. Humans see gradients of probability and opportunity. Their so-called stubbornness is actually sophisticated risk management that acknowledges sometimes the safest option is to continue through danger rather than retreat from it. They understand that in some situations, stopping is more dangerous than continuing, even when continuing looks suicidal to outside observers. This risk calculus becomes their greatest asset in emergency situations. While others are following predetermined safety protocols based on ideal conditions, humans are dynamically reassessing risks and opportunities as conditions change. They're not being stubborn. They're being adaptable in their persistence, constantly recalculating whether the mission remains viable as new information emerges. So after the hegemony incident proved humans could operate in conditions that should have killed them, the galactic community decided to test whether this was a fluke or something that could actually be utilized. They formed the first experimental human disaster response corps teams, essentially taking the theory from the council chamber and seeing if it worked in practice. Nobody knew if human adaptability could be scaled and deployed effectively. The early teams were a mix of engineers, scientists, and what humans call thrill seekers, people who apparently find professional satisfaction in walking into situations others are running from. They started getting called into scenarios where conventional safety systems had completely failed, where established protocols said evacuation was the only option. The Harmonious Inquiry Station incident became their first major test case. A research vessel studying atmospheric phenomena experienced a catastrophic containment breach that released a toxic gas cloud throughout the central modules. The cloud contained reactive compounds that should have been impossible to navigate without. Specialized sealed environment suits, equipment that had been destroyed. In the initial breach, standard emergency protocols were clear. Complete evacuation followed by waiting for specialized containment teams with the proper equipment. The assessment showed anyone attempting to operate within the cloud would suffer immediate respiratory failure and systemic toxicity. The station's automated systems had already written off the central modules as irrecoverable. Then the HDRC team arrived, 2 engineers who looked at the situation and apparently decided the safety assessments were more like suggestions than actual rules. They went in with basic breathing masks that everyone knew were completely inadequate for the chemical cocktail filling the station. Protocol said they should have been dead within minutes. Instead of following evacuation orders, they worked their way through the toxic environment to the atmospheric processing core. They bypassed safety lockouts that were supposed to prevent tampering with active systems, rerouted ventilation controls manually, and actually used the toxic cloud itself as part of the filtration process. They treated the emergency not as a containment problem, but as a systems engineering challenge that happened to have lethal atmospheric conditions. While specialized teams were still suiting up miles away, the human engineers had already stabilized the situation, using nothing but basic tools and what appeared to be complete disregard for established safety parameters. They didn't wait for proper equipment, because they treated their own biological adaptability as the proper equipment. The gas cloud that should have killed them became just another environmental variable to work around. The aftermath showed they'd not only stopped the leak but actually improved the filtration system's efficiency in the process. Medical scans revealed they'd absorbed toxin levels that would have hospitalized any other species for weeks, yet they showed only minor irritation that cleared up within hours. They'd turned a catastrophic failure into a systems upgrade, while working in conditions everyone else considered certain death. This became the pattern for early HDRC deployments. Humans going into impossible situations with minimal equipment, treating safety protocols as optional guidelines, and achieving results that defied all established understanding of biological limits. They weren't just surviving hostile environments. They were operating effectively in them, turning catastrophes into manageable problems through a combination of biological adaptability and what looked like professional stubbornness. The galaxy was learning that human safety parameters weren't about avoiding danger but about managing it. Where others saw impossible conditions, humans saw challenging work environments. The HDRC teams kept demonstrating that sometimes the best safety equipment wasn't better technology. It was better biological adaptation to unfavorable conditions. You want to talk about a mission that should have been absolutely impossible? The Sigma Drownus incident redefined what impossible even means. A dark matter containment failure doesn't just create a radiation leak or structural damage. It unravels the fundamental rules of how reality operates. This wasn't just another emergency. It was a localized breakdown of physics itself. The containment breach created a space-time anomaly where normal laws stopped applying consistently. Gravity would fluctuate randomly between crushing force and weightlessness without warning. Time didn't flow in a linear fashion. Moments would loop, skip forward, or occasionally seem to stop altogether. Reality itself became unstable, with matter phases shifting unpredictably and energy states fluctuating in ways that should have been theoretically impossible. Conventional emergency teams couldn't even approach the containment field. Their equipment malfunctioned unpredictably, their navigation systems gave contradictory readings, and several automated probes sent into the anomaly simply ceased to exist in any measurable way. Standard protocols had no procedures for situations where physics itself was the variable that kept changing. The HDRC sent David Park, the engineer from Hegemony, along with Martinez and Wong. They entered the anomaly, knowing the operational parameters might change from one moment to the next, accepting that the rules of reality itself would be inconsistent and unpredictable. Their approach wasn't to fight the instability, but to work within it, treating the changing physics as just another environmental condition to accommodate. Wong experienced multiple temporal states simultaneously during the operation. Her after-action report described moments where she existed in several time states at once, experiencing the past, present, and potential futures as overlapping realities. Where another species might have experienced catatonic shock or neurological collapse, she noted the experience as temporally disorienting but operationally manageable once you stop, expecting causality to work normally. They stabilized the containment by improvising with the very physics that were malfunctioning. Instead of trying to force systems back to normal operation, they worked with the fluctuating conditions, using gravity surges to move equipment when they needed extra force, riding temporal loops to test multiple solutions simultaneously, and treating the unstable reality as a toolkit rather than an obstacle. The official report became legendary for its understatement. It concluded that temporal distortions and physical inconsistencies were manageable, operational parameters once personnel ceased, expecting them to conform to established physical laws. The assessment read like someone describing slightly challenging weather conditions, rather than reality itself unraveling around them. What made the Sigma Draunus operation different was that humans didn't treat the anomaly as a problem to be solved, but as conditions to be worked within. They didn't try to restore normal physics. They adapted their methods to function within abnormal physics. Their approach was to find ways to achieve their objectives using whatever physical rules happened to be operating at any given moment, rather than wasting effort trying to make reality behave properly. This mission demonstrated that human adaptability wasn't just about surviving extreme environments, but about functioning effectively when the very definitions of environment and survival kept changing. They'd moved beyond handling dangerous conditions to operating in fundamentally impossible ones, treating reality itself as just another variable rather than a fixed constant. The Sigma Draunus anomaly became the benchmark for impossible missions after that. Where other species saw fundamental physical limits, humans saw interesting challenges. They'd proven that even the laws of physics were more like guidelines when you had the right mindset and biological adaptability. The galaxy learned that human capabilities weren't bounded by conventional understanding of what was possible. They were limited only by what hadn't been tried yet. Look, after Sigma Draunus, the HDRC stopped being an experimental concept and became a legitimate galactic institution. The incident proved human adaptability wasn't just anecdotal evidence or some fluke of biology. It was a reproducible capability that could be deployed systematically. The galaxy finally accepted that what looked like magical thinking was actually a different, operational paradigm altogether. The HDRC developed formal training, programs focused specifically on cultivating improvisation rather than drilling standardized protocols. They recruited people who saw impossible situations not as reasons to evacuate, but as interesting challenges to solve. The selection process looked for candidates who reacted to catastrophic failure scenarios with curiosity rather than panic, who treated system collapses as puzzles rather than emergencies. Their training incorporated exposure to increasingly bizarre environmental conditions, deliberately creating situations where standard procedures would fail and improvisation became necessary. Trainees worked in fluctuating gravity fields, unpredictable atmospheric compositions, and energy environments that changed too rapidly for conventional safety systems to respond. The exercises were designed to break the instinct to follow established protocols and instead develop the ability to create new solutions on the fly. After Sigma Draunus, they even added nonlinear time exposure exercises to the curriculum. Trainees experienced temporal distortions and reality fluctuations that would have caused neurological collapse in most species, learning to maintain operational effectiveness when causality itself became unreliable. The training philosophy shifted from preparing for specific scenarios to developing generalized adaptability for whatever unexpected conditions might arise. Hazard pay for existential uncertainty. Missions became standardized, acknowledging that HDRC personnel regularly operated in situations where survival wasn't just unlikely, but theoretically impossible, according to established physics. The compensation structure recognized that their work involved confronting fundamental uncertainties that went beyond conventional risk assessment models. The operational motto evolved into a simple, practical statement: mission accomplished, minimal casualties. This reflected their focus on achieving objectives while maintaining personnel safety, but with the understanding that safety meant functioning effectively within danger rather than avoiding danger altogether. Success was measured by results achieved under impossible conditions, not by adherence to safety protocols. The HDRC developed specialized equipment designed to enhance human capabilities rather than replace them. They created tools that could function across multiple environmental conditions, communication systems that worked when local physics became unreliable, and sensors that provided useful data even when reality itself was uncooperative. The technology supported human adaptability, rather than attempting to create artificial safety zones. This institutionalization represented a fundamental shift in how the galaxy approached impossible problems. Where others saw barriers, the HDRC saw operational parameters. They'd taken humanity's paradoxical approach to crisis management. This combination of biological adaptability, improvisational thinking, and calculated risk tolerance, and turned it into a repeatable methodology that could be taught, equipped, and deployed systematically across the galactic community. The organization's effectiveness became encapsulated in that now famous after-action report line from Sigma Drownus that simply stated temporal distortions and reality fluctuations were manageable once personnel stopped expecting them to make sense. That single sentence captured the entire institutional philosophy. Don't fight the impossible, work within it. You know what happened next? Surprised everyone who'd been watching this unfold from the beginning. The real shift wasn't just that the galaxy started using human teams for impossible missions. It was that other species began adopting human problem-solving methods themselves. This wasn't about outsourcing danger to the Death World species anymore. It was about learning how they thought. The Corvanathi, with their crystalline logic systems that valued perfect information before action, began integrating what they called human-style improvisation into their emergency teams. They started training personnel to develop multiple solutions simultaneously, rather than following linear decision trees, accepting that sometimes you have to act with incomplete data. Their engineers began testing approaches in parallel, running several potential fixes at once instead of waiting for one perfect solution to emerge. The Vaxi adopted what they termed human-style persistence, continuing to work on problems even after conventional methods had failed completely. They shifted their training to emphasize that failure wasn't an endpoint, but valuable data for the next attempt. Real technicians embraced human-style experimentation, treating system failures as interesting puzzles rather than catastrophes, approaching each new crisis with curiosity rather than panic. Emergency response times improved dramatically across species, not because of better technology but because of better thinking. Teams were solving problems faster with the same equipment, achieving success rates that defied previous statistical models. Situations that were previously considered unsolvable were now being resolved regularly, not by human teams but by other species using human methodologies. The galaxy wasn't just utilizing humans anymore. They were learning from us. Safety protocols underwent a fundamental shift from risk avoidance to managed operation within dangerous conditions. The old model of creating perfectly safe environments gave way to a new approach of functioning effectively within unsafe ones. Emergency manuals were rewritten to emphasize adaptability over procedure, improvisation over predetermined responses. This represented a complete transformation in how intelligent beings approached problems universally. The relationship with risk changed galaxy-wide, moving from fear of uncertainty to acceptance of it as a normal operating condition. Species that had spent centuries developing perfect safety systems began designing systems that could fail gracefully rather than perfectly, incorporating redundancy and adaptability into their fundamental design principles. Humanity became teachers of a new epistemology for coping with unpredictable reality. We weren't just showing other species how to survive impossible situations, we were showing them how to think about impossibility itself. The difference between possible and impossible became recognized as often just a matter of perspective and approach rather than absolute physical limits. The Galactic Council observed that human teams consistently identified solutions that standard protocols missed because they approached problems from fundamentally different assumptions. They operated on the belief that a solution always exists somewhere, that attempting something is better than waiting for perfect information, and that failure provides data rather than reasons to stop. These assumptions, born from evolving on a planet that never offered the luxury of giving up, became the foundation of a new galactic approach to crisis management. Counselor Thai Cavell described the impact as revolutionary, noting that the galactic community had gained a systematic approach to handling situations that exceeded known capabilities. Captain Vasquez emphasized that the human approach wasn't based on uniquely human assumptions, but rather on the fact that humans never learned to think any other way because their planet never gave them the option of surrender. This perspective shift from seeing humans as uniquely capable to seeing their methods as learnable marked the true beginning of the galactic culture shift. Let me explain what humans mean when they say impossible is just Tuesday. For most species, impossible represents a hard boundary not to cross, a line drawn by physics or biology that defines the absolute limits of what can be accomplished. They treat impossibility as a stop sign, a reason to turn back and reconsider objectives. Their entire operational framework assumes that some problems simply cannot be solved with available resources or current understanding. But humans treat impossible as a starting point for creative thinking. They don't recognize the same boundaries because their evolutionary history never allowed them that luxury. On Earth, impossible things happened with such regularity that adapting to them became necessary for survival. Ice ages that should have wiped out all life, atmospheric changes that should have made respiration impossible, predators that should have outcompeted early humans into extinction. Their planet presented them with constantly shifting definitions of what was possible. This created a fundamentally different relationship with limitation. Where other species see walls, humans see interesting architectural challenges. They approach problems that others consider unsolvable, not with resignation but with curiosity, treating each impossibility as a puzzle waiting to be understood rather than a barrier preventing progress. Their thought processes automatically generate alternative approaches when conventional methods fail, testing multiple solutions simultaneously rather than following predetermined protocols. This difference isn't about superiority, it's about different evolutionary conditioning. As Captain Vasquez liked to remind everyone, humans aren't better, just weird. Their specialness comes from being adapted to completely different evolutionary pressures than any other known species. While others evolved in relatively stable environments that rewarded specialization and predictable responses, humans evolved in chaos that rewarded flexibility and creative problem-solving. Their entire biological and psychological framework developed around the assumption that the rules would change without warning. What worked perfectly one season could become completely ineffective the next, so they evolved to treat all solutions as temporary and all problems as solvable through sufficient creativity. This mindset makes them approach seemingly impossible situations not as reasons to surrender, but as interesting challenges to overcome. The Tuesday principle encapsulates this entire philosophy. For humans, dealing with the impossible isn't extraordinary. It's just another day at the office. They've internalized the expectation that reality will frequently present them with situations that defy conventional understanding or exceed established capabilities. Their response isn't panic or retreat, but curiosity and experimentation, treating each new impossibility as data rather than defeat. This explains why human teams can operate in conditions that would paralyze other species. They're not braver or more reckless, they're simply operating from a different set of assumptions about how the universe works. Where others see fundamental limits, humans see interesting variables. Where others encounter barriers, humans find starting points. Their entire evolutionary history prepared them not for a safe, predictable universe, but for one where survival meant constantly redefining what was possible. The galaxy is learning that human capabilities stem from this fundamental difference in perspective. It's not that humans can do impossible things. It's that they don't recognize the same definitions of impossibility. Their evolutionary path created a species that treats limits as suggestions rather than laws, boundaries as challenges rather than restrictions. This mindset, forged through millions of years of everything trying to kill them, became their greatest asset in a universe full of unpredictable dangers. You know what the financial analysts noticed first? It wasn't the dramatic rescue footage or the impressive survival statistics. It was the budget reports. HDRC missions consistently cost a fraction of conventional emergency responses, and that got their attention faster than any heroic story ever could. The numbers told a story that even the most skeptical accountant couldn't ignore. Where traditional response teams required massive specialized equipment, large support staffs, and expensive containment systems, human teams operated with basic gear and minimal support infrastructure. A conventional rescue operation might involve multiple ships, specialized environmental suits, and complex deployment protocols. Human teams showed up with standard equipment and treated impossible conditions as just another work environment. The resource expenditure difference was staggering. Human missions consistently achieved objectives with maybe 10% of the material resources that conventional approaches required. Insurance companies were the first major industry to notice the pattern. Operations that included human teams started showing dramatically lower claim rates, which meant lower premiums for everyone involved. The mere presence of humans became a quantifiable risk mitigation factor that actuaries could actually price into their models. Ships with human crew members saw better insurance rates than those without. Stations that hired HDRC consultants for safety reviews got preferential treatment from underwriters. The financial incentive became so clear that ignoring it would have been professional malpractice. Galactic safety budgets underwent a fundamental reallocation. Instead of pouring credits into increasingly sophisticated protective equipment that might fail under novel conditions, organizations started investing in training programs focused on adaptability and improvisation. They realized that teaching personnel to function within danger was more cost-effective than trying to create perfectly safe environments. The money shifted from hardware to mindset, from technology to training, from building better walls to developing better problem solvers. This economic incentive accelerated the adoption of human methods across species lines. When financial analysts can show clear cost-benefit advantages, cultural resistance tends to evaporate pretty quickly. Corporations that previously hesitated to embrace human approaches suddenly became enthusiastic supporters when they saw the bottom-line impact. Missions that were previously considered financially unviable, too risky, too expensive, too likely to fail, suddenly became practical propositions when human teams were involved. The calculus of risk management changed because human presence fundamentally altered the odds. Where conventional assessment models showed near-certain failure, human teams demonstrated consistent success. Insurance models that previously required massive premiums for high-risk operations could now offer reasonable rates based on demonstrated human capabilities. Financial planning shifted from assuming catastrophic losses to expecting manageable outcomes even in seemingly impossible situations. This economic transformation created a virtuous cycle. Lower costs meant more missions could be funded, which provided more data on human effectiveness, which further improved risk assessment models, which drove costs down even further. The entire galactic approach to emergency funding and risk management underwent a quiet revolution, all because accountants noticed that human teams saved money while saving lives. The financial imperative became the driving force behind the cultural shift, proving that sometimes the most persuasive argument isn't moral or ethical, it's economic. Look, there's something psychologically profound happening here that goes beyond the practical benefits of having humans handle impossible situations. Watching humans operate in conditions that should kill them changes how other species perceive their own limitations. It's like seeing someone casually walk through a wall you've spent your entire life assuming was solid and impenetrable. Suddenly, the wall might not be as solid as you thought. For generations, most species accepted certain problems as fundamentally unsolvable, certain environments as inherently unsurvivable. Their entire framework for understanding risk and possibility was built around established physical laws and biological limits. Then humans arrived and started treating those laws and limits as flexible guidelines rather than absolute boundaries. The psychological impact of watching someone succeed where failure was considered inevitable challenges the deepest assumptions about what reality actually allows. Other species report increased confidence in facing their own challenges after observing human teams in action. It's not that they suddenly develop human-level adaptability, but that the human example demonstrates adaptation itself is possible. Where they previously saw absolute barriers, they now see challenges that might be overcome with different approaches. The psychological shift is from "this is impossible" to "this might be possible if we think differently about it." This isn't just about emergency response protocols anymore. It's about changing how intelligent beings approach problems universally. The human example shows that sometimes the solution isn't better technology or stronger materials, but better thinking. That sometimes the barrier isn't the problem itself, but our assumptions about the problem. This psychological realization might actually be more important than any practical application of human capabilities. Humans became living proof that impossible is a mutable concept rather than an absolute state. They demonstrate through action that boundaries often exist first in our understanding, rather than in reality. Their consistent success in seemingly impossible situations provides tangible evidence that limits can be redefined, that assumptions can be challenged, that new approaches can yield unexpected solutions. The greatest export humanity brought to the galaxy wasn't safety or protection, or even their unique biological adaptability. It was hope based on demonstrated adaptability, the proven possibility that solutions exist even when established understanding says they shouldn't. This psychological shift, this redefinition of possible, might ultimately prove more valuable than any single rescue operation or systems repair. Watching humans work changes how species perceive their own capabilities. It creates a mental framework where I can't becomes maybe I can if I tried differently. This isn't about becoming human-like in ability, but about adopting a human-like relationship with limitation itself. The real transformation isn't in what species can do physically, but in what they believe is possible mentally. This psychological effect spreads through organizations and cultures, changing how problems are approached at fundamental levels. Teams that previously followed rigid protocols now experiment with alternative approaches. Engineers who once designed for perfect operation now design for graceful failure. The entire galactic approach to challenge and limitation has shifted, because one species demonstrated through consistent action that the impossible might just be Tuesday. You know what the xenobiologists still can't agree on in their academic debates? Whether humanity's particular flavor of adaptability is a unique biological artifact or something that could be replicated across other species. They've been arguing this since the first HDRC report started circulating through scientific journals, and the division pretty much splits down the middle between two camps with completely different interpretations of the same data. One side insists humans are evolutionary, outliers that can't be duplicated, that are particular. Combination of biological resilience and cognitive flexibility resulted from such specific environmental pressures that trying to replicate it in other species would be like trying to grow coral in a desert. They point to the multi-layered redundancy in our biological systems, the real-time adaptive capabilities that seem to operate on principles nobody fully understands, and the fact that no other species has demonstrated anything remotely similar, despite millennia of spacefaring development. Their position is basically that humans are a fascinating evolutionary fluke, useful to employ but impossible to reproduce. The other camp believes our methods can be learned despite the biological differences. They argue that while our physical adaptability might be unique, the thinking patterns that make us effective, the improvisation, the risk assessment, the comfort with uncertainty, are cognitive approaches that any intelligent species could adopt with proper training. They point to the success other species have had integrating human problem-solving methods into their own emergency response protocols, the improved outcomes across multiple civilizations, and the psychological shifts that suggest the human approach is transferable, even if the biology isn't. The evidence actually shows both perspectives contain elements of truth. Our biological adaptability does appear uniquely human, a direct result of evolving on a planet that presented multiple simultaneous threats that changed constantly over geological time. The way our immune systems adapt to novel radiation, our circulatory systems manage extreme stress, our cognitive functions maintain clarity in chaotic conditions. These seem to be biological adaptations specific to Earth's particular brand of environmental insanity. But the thinking patterns absolutely can be adopted by other species. The improvisational approach, the comfort with uncertainty, the persistence in solving problems others consider impossible. These are cognitive strategies that multiple civilizations have successfully integrated into their own operations. The Corvinati didn't develop human biology, but they did adopt human-style improvisation. The Vexi didn't become biologically redundant, but they embraced human-style persistence. This creates a fascinating galactic experiment in cross-species evolution. We're seeing different civilizations adopting similar problem-solving approaches, despite their biological differences, developing convergent strategies for handling unpredictable situations. It's not biological evolution, but cognitive evolution. Species developing similar mental tools for dealing with similar challenges, even if their physical hardware remains different. The question becomes whether we're witnessing the beginning of true convergent evolutionary thinking across the galactic community. Are different species evolving toward similar approaches to problem solving, Because those approaches work better in an unpredictable universe? Is the human example triggering a broader shift in how intelligent beings handle uncertainty and impossibility? Humanity might be acting as the catalyst for the next phase of galactic evolution through shared problem-solving methodologies. We're not just providing a service. We're demonstrating different ways of thinking about challenges that other species can adopt and adapt to their own capabilities. The biological differences remain, but the cognitive approaches are converging, creating a galactic community that's developing shared tools for handling the unpredictable nature of existence in an often hostile universe. This represents something more significant than just improved emergency response capabilities. It suggests that evolution isn't just about biological adaptation, but about the development and spread of effective problem-solving strategies across intelligent species. Humanity's Death World legacy might be triggering a galactic-scale evolution in how thinking itself adapts to challenge and change. Let me address the question everyone's thinking, but not asking when they first hear about the HDRC operations. Is it ethical to send humans into situations that would instantly kill any other species? The Galactic Ethics Committees spent months debating this, and their conclusions surprised everyone who expected them to. Restrict human deployments for safety. Reasons the committees discovered that humans don't perceive these missions as danger in the same way other species do. We see impossible situations as interesting work that provides professional satisfaction. Our evolutionary psychology creates a completely different risk assessment framework where catastrophic failure isn't something to avoid, but something to solve. The ethical calculus had to account for this fundamental difference in how humans experience and value dangerous work. You have to understand that HDRC has waiting lists of qualified applicants eager for challenging missions. These aren't people being forced into danger. They're highly trained professionals who find meaning and satisfaction in solving problems others consider impossible. For humans, being prevented from doing this work feels like being caged or having our fundamental nature denied. The ethical question shifted dramatically once the committees understood this perspective. Instead of asking how to protect humans from danger, they started asking how to respect human nature and evolutionary adaptation. The greatest ethical violation wouldn't be sending humans into challenging situations. It would be preventing humans from doing what we evolved to do. Our capacity for handling extreme conditions and solving impossible problems isn't just a capability. It's part of our identity and purpose as a species. The committees realized that treating humans as fragile beings needing protection would itself be unethical. It would mean denying our evolutionary heritage and preventing us from fulfilling our potential. The satisfaction humans derive from this work isn't secondary. It's central to why we're effective and why we choose to do it. Preventing that satisfaction would be like preventing a bird from flying or a fish from swimming because those activities involve some element of risk. This ethical framework acknowledges that different species have different relationships with risk and danger. What seems terrifyingly dangerous to one species might be professionally satisfying to another. The committees learned that ethical treatment requires understanding these differences rather than imposing uniform safety standards that don't account for biological and psychological variation across species. The result was a complete reversal of the initial ethical concerns. Instead of restricting human deployments, the committees developed guidelines for ensuring humans have access to challenging work that provides professional satisfaction. They recognized that protecting humans doesn't mean wrapping us in safety protocols. It means respecting our nature and allowing us to do the work we find meaningful, even when that work looks dangerously impossible to outside observers. This ethical shift changed how the galaxy views human teams. We're not being exploited or placed in unreasonable danger. We're being allowed to do what we do best in situations where our unique capabilities provide the greatest value. The ethical consideration became about matching human teams with appropriate challenges, rather than protecting us from challenges altogether. It's about letting humans be human in a galaxy that's learning what that actually means. You know where this all leads, right? The HDRC model is expanding far beyond emergency response work. Humans are getting integrated into system design from the very beginning now, consulted during the blueprint phase, rather than just called when everything's already falling apart. We're helping design ships, stations, and infrastructure with failure baked into the planning rather than treated as something to avoid entirely. The fundamental principle has shifted from building systems that never fail to building systems that fail gracefully. Instead of engineering perfect solutions that collapse completely when something unexpected happens, we're designing systems that can degrade functionality gradually, maintain essential operations despite partial failures, and provide multiple pathways to achieve critical objectives. It's like designing a ship that can still navigate even if half the engines fail and the primary computer goes offline, not as efficiently, but well enough to complete the mission. This represents a complete transformation in galactic engineering philosophy. Where previous approaches focused on eliminating single points of failure, the new methodology assumes multiple points of failure will occur and designs around that certainty. Systems are being built with human-style redundancy and adaptability as core features rather than afterthoughts. The design priority has shifted from perfect operation to functional survival under adverse conditions. Human presence is becoming standard for high-risk operations across the galaxy, but our role has evolved dramatically. We're not just emergency responders anymore. We're preventive strategists integrated into planning teams, risk assessment panels, and system design committees. Our value comes from anticipating how things might fail and designing responses in advance rather than improvising them during crises. The galaxy is learning to build with adaptability rather than against it. Engineering teams are incorporating flexible systems that can be modified in the field, redundant pathways that operate independently, and interfaces that allow for creative problem-solving when standard procedures fail. They're designing for the reality that conditions change, systems fail, and unexpected situations arise, rather than pretending these things can be completely prevented through perfect design. This shift reflects humanity's death world legacy being applied at the systemic level. Just as our biology developed multiple redundant systems to handle environmental challenges, galactic engineering is now incorporating multiple redundant approaches to handle operational challenges. The focus has moved from preventing failure to managing it effectively when it inevitably occurs. The economic impact alone is driving this transformation. Systems designed with graceful failure capabilities cost less to maintain and ensure, have longer operational lifetimes, and achieve better outcomes under adverse conditions. The financial incentives align perfectly with the practical benefits. Building resilient systems saves money while saving lives. What started as an emergency response capability has become a fundamental redesign philosophy. Humanity's evolutionary experience with constant environmental challenges is making the entire galactic infrastructure more resilient. We're not just fixing problems anymore. We're helping build systems that won't need as much fixing in the first place, or at least will handle their own problems more effectively when they arise. The future of galactic safety looks less like perfect protection and more like managed adaptability. Systems that can handle unexpected conditions, personnel trained to improvise solutions, and designs that incorporate failure as a feature rather than a bug. Humanity's death world legacy has become the galaxy's resilience strategy, turning our evolutionary baggage into everyone's survival advantage. So when Captain Vasquez said we are the armor, she meant it biologically. Humanity's evolutionary path created a living safety system forged through constant environmental pressure, not specialized protection against specific threats, but broad adaptability to handle anything. The galaxy learned that sometimes the best protection isn't a better shield or stronger alloy. It's a particular way of thinking about problems. Where others see impossible barriers, humans see interesting challenges. Our true value isn't in the technology we build, but in the perspective we bring. That impossible is just a temporary condition waiting for the right approach.